That's funny.
So tonight to talk is Bill Dunphy, who's web editor at the Talented Spectator and the lead hand on their open information project. He's going to talk about open data, the web, and community collaboration. So welcome, Bill.
Thank you very much. So first, let me start off by saying I am not an expert.
Oh,
Yeah, so we can all just hit the bar and just pretend. But actually, one of the interesting things is that there are not any journalism experts in open data in Canada. We don't have them yet. Other places do. So, if any of you are looking to carve out a niche, which is what anyone will tell you is how you advance your career, open data is wide open. And I'm serious. I think there's a real opportunity for journalists who are not afraid of numbers and not afraid of programming. You don't have to, the journalism side, you don't have to be fully, you don't have to be a developer or a coder and so on, you just have to be not afraid of it. I think there's a real opportunity to establish dominance and prominence in it. Because although that's one of my roles at The Spectator, to tell you the truth, I can't wait to get back full-time to pure writing. So I'm going to do a bunch of things, and I have an exit strategy. So I'm not going to dominate this field. So please jump in. Let me just tell you very quickly a little bit about myself. I didn't go to journalism school because at the time I was entering the field, everyone I spoke to said get a real education. So the world has changed since then, but at that time that was smart advice, and I did that. In my last year, I took over the student newspaper as editor for the very first time I ever did anything in journalism. So now you know I'm incredibly arrogant and conceited. And then did that for a year, and then launched myself out into the world. The very first real journalism I did outside of university was I volunteered with a brand new newspaper called the Catholic New Times, which was a social activist paper at the time. And my first story was a 3-month-long, 5-part investigation of interlocking Canadian corporate directorships and the effect that had on efforts to organize a South African boycott. So that kind of skewed my notion of what journalism was. It was an amazing experience. And I spent my whole summer at the Central Reference Library in the business department, looking through who's, looking through the corporate directories. This is all old school, these are all books. And one of the things that stunned me was how very much information and how much I was able to build this very large piece based on open public information. That corporations were required to post this and publish this information, and by making use of it, I could start to see connections and build a really powerful story about how interlocking directorships were affecting Canadian public policy and foreign policy. After that, I went to work for a community newspaper and ended up at the Toronto Sun. So it wasn't always that serious. Most of my time in journalism has been spent in investigative reporting and crime reporting. I have spent the last 3 years outside of the newsroom, almost 4 years now, outside of the newsroom, working on a series of technical projects. I ran WebU, a digital and tech training program for Metroland. We put through their entire Metroland West editorial staff, advertising staff, and marketing staff in a week-long course that trained them about the web and digital technology. I did that for a year and then got put into the Tour Stars, seconded to this project that rolled out a new content management system across the chain. So you can see why I was kind of anxious to get back to writing. Unfortunately, when I got back, I shouldn't say unfortunately. Let me take that back. Turn that off. When I got back, The Spectator was a very different newspaper than when I left it. It was probably about 2/3 of the newsroom, the size of it. And the city and the public institutions they were dealing with were very different too from when I left. They had really shut down. The police chief, a brand new police chief, refused to ever be quoted. He refused to ever give interviews. Think about that. They were experiencing, and still are experiencing, real difficulties accessing information in the city. And the editor-in-chief, Paul Burton, decided to launch this project, and that's one of the things I'm doing in addition to being a web editor, called Our Information, Our City. Our City, Our Information. I should get it straight. Our City, Our Information. It's dealing with open data. It's also dealing with information and the increasing way that in society we seem to be accepting people locking information down from us as journalists and as from the public. If any of you are involved in certainly governmental reporting and any kind of legislative reporting, you're familiar. I mean, if you've been doing it a while, I think that anyone will tell you things have really, in the last 5 years, things have really calcified around releasing information. Against that, there's a groundswell. And it's not huge in Canada. But over the last 5 years, there's been a reaction. And I think it may end up being truly disruptive. I don't know yet. But because of the internet, because of the tools that we have, ordinary people, just like ordinary people are publishing, ordinary people are writing, they're doing video online, they're running their own information services without respect to our organs. People are using these tools to begin to pry at public institutions, to demand information from them and to use that information. So here in Toronto, a really simple example is what's it called, MyTTC? Right, a great example of there's this group of like 18 to 35-year-old incredibly civic engaged people in just about any city I've been in. Like people in that age group in urban centers want to love their city and they want it to be way better than it is currently. And in Toronto, one part of that group looks at the TDC and understands how valuable that is. And so they launched the MyTTC site. They got 2 million data points from volunteers. 2 million data points of bus scheduling, bus routes. So they got what the TDC was offering publicly, which wasn't terribly good. And they said this isn't good enough for us to build the kind of transit website that the TDC should have. So they asked people to go out and to record bus arrivals, to record where the stops were on maps. And they built a system of mapping the TDC that's way better than the TDC has. The first apps for mobile that allow you to see where's my streetcar, the first ones that came out didn't use TDC information. They used information that this group had prepared. This group, by the way, did it free of charge. They're offering all of their information. It's all open source, licensed for anyone to use. They're not making money on this project in any way, shape, or form. So that kind of, I don't know what you call that, civic-mindedness, engagement, that stuff is growing up all over the place. It's part of movements that are broadly called open government and open data. People who are committed to the notion that in a free society, the freest society will be one where the government and public institutions are absolutely free with all of their public information. So that doesn't mean your address necessarily, or whether you're late paying your tax bill. But information that is about the city, about city services, or about the country, about the spending, all of these kinds of things should be publicly available. And what they've demonstrated time and again is that releasing information publicly can actually yield to economic benefits. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time sort of outlining this because frankly I am very much still in a learning mode on this. I'm not pretending to be an expert here. I would direct you to David Eaves, DAVIDEAVES.ca. And David is probably Canada's leading authority, I hate to use the word, on open data. David's an example of someone who is I'm not sure what he is. A consultant. Like, he came sort of out of academia and sort of out of journalism, but he doesn't belong to any of those places fully. And he's created an identity and a sphere, and he knows it really well, inhabits it deeply, and he was one of the first people there. So now he's available as a resource for people who are starting to see that they need to know more about this. His blog, which is just his name, .ca, is a great resource for understanding this. And if you start paying attention to him and looking at where he's reading, where he's paying attention to, in short order you'll be able to build up a collection of RSS feeds that will make you quite knowledgeable about this. I run a simple tumble log where I'm just using it as a notebook, just recording things that, okay, I want to remember this, so that's kind of neat, that's interesting, which is just ourcityourinfo.tumblr.com. Our City, Our Info.
He's a monster.
The Toronto, London, Ottawa, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, all have open data programs and initiatives going on. If you look in communities that you serve, you will also probably find grassroots open data groups. And they'll be called, in Hamilton it's openhamilton.ca, in Halton it's Open Halton, Open Guelph, Open Waterloo, etc. You'll find people who are, though, that demographic I was talking about, plus some older folks, who are intensely interested in being engaged, in accessing information and doing things with it that make it more accessible and more useful. So why do we care about this as journalists? It's pretty obvious to me. You can tell great stories with data. Probably many of you are familiar with the work of Patrick Kane at the Star. Unfortunately, he's gone. I guess he's now with global.ca. But that's it. I think he was a bit of a pioneer in that regard. Someone who set about telling stories using maps, which is one form of data. And he did some very engaging, very powerful storytelling that way. And Patrick is not a particular number geek or developer in that sense. He's a guy who had the passion and the interest and taught himself these things. Data, by the way, and building stories out of data isn't all accessing databases and learning how to scrape data, suck it off some website and put it through tables and parse it out, query it to figure out patterns and tell stories with it. Patrick did a great series for openfile.ca around baby names, where he looked at the most popular baby names over the course of many years and geographically, so he could tell you if you were in this city in these years, this was the most popular, these were the top 10 girl names and these were the top 10 boy names. He did most of that by spending time in the archives, going through individual paper copies of information and laboriously copying it and typing it into his own materials. So you don't have to be a total geek to be able to work in this.